I'm Kevin Cirilli. It's time for the Daily Debrief. Let's get right to it. House Republicans are one step closer to impeaching President Biden. This, as the House Speaker Mike Johnson said that earlier, he plans to have a vote next week to formalize an impeachment inquiry.
It will be a movement, a vote of the full House, and that will allow us to continue and continue on pace. This vote is not a vote to impeach President Biden. This is a vote to continue the inquiry of impeachment, and that's a necessary constitutional step, and I believe we'll get every vote that we get.
So what could the charges be? Bribery, abuse of power, and obstruction. That's according to Congressman Ralph Norman.
100% behind it. 100%.
And are you confident they'll have the votes and the conversations with other members?
With what's come up recently, yes, they will.
What came up recently?
The checks, where they found it direct checks to Biden. It's no longer he said, she said. It's pretty serious stuff.
But before articles of impeachment are brought to the House floor, a lot has to happen first. The first step is a vote to formalize an impeachment inquiry, and that's the step that Speaker Johnson says will happen next week. So what exactly is an impeachment inquiry? Essentially, it's a way for the House to signal to the broader public that they mean business, but it doesn't necessarily mean that an impeachment will happen. In fact, there's been like 90 impeachment inquiries since the late 1700s, and the U.S. Constitution, it doesn't even require for an impeachment inquiry to occur before articles of impeachment are brought to the House floor. Republicans, they've been investigating the Biden family and its business dealings for months. And while the White House says that the impeachment is just a big nothing burger, sources at the White House told me that they've already set up an impeachment political war room to fight House Republicans. And get this, Republicans are saying that the Biden orbit hasn't been fully cooperative with their House investigations. GOP leadership, including House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan and House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, they've argued that a formal impeachment inquiry would give them more leeway in investigating their case. And that's why next week's vote is so pivotal. Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis threw jabs last night at the News Nation Republican presidential debate. This, as the two presidential candidates are locked in a close race for second place behind the frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. And with just 6 weeks away before the Iowa caucus, both Haley and DeSantis sharpened their attacks against each other. And Chris Christie, he was there too. He threw out a Harry Potter reference in a jab against the elephant in the room who wasn't on stage, Trump.
I've got these three guys who are all seemingly to compete with, Voldemort. He who shall not be named. They don't want to talk about it.
I wonder what house all of the candidates would be if they were in Harry Potter. And then there was this, DeSantis and Haley trolling each other over, you guessed it, social media.
I never said government should go and require anyone's name.
That's false. She said, I want your name. She as President of the United States, her first day in office, she said, one of the first things I'm going to do,
I said we were going to get the millions of votes.
She wants government ID to dox every American. That's what she said. You can roll the tape.
Don't expect either of the candidates to make a TikTok anytime soon, because that was also a topic as Nikki Haley called for the U.S. to ban the social media app, quote, once and for all. House Republicans are set to file a formal impeachment inquiry against President Biden, with a vote coming as early as next week. And here with all of the latest is the Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell. She's joining me live from Capitol Hill. Michael, do they have the votes?
Well, look, Kevin, that's going to be the big question when this resolution hits the floor, the expectation, and it's going to be next week. We've heard from a number of moderate and vulnerable Republicans who are lining up behind this impeachment inquiry, essentially saying that, look, there's a difference between opening an impeachment inquiry, authorizing this inquiry, which they say will just bolster their investigative powers, be able to continue this investigation, and actually voting on articles of impeachment. They say they're not there yet, but many of these vulnerable Republicans, particularly those who represent districts President Biden won back in 2020, are okay with bolstering the investigation, which is a good sign for Speaker Johnson. But time will tell when this resolution actually hits the floor next week. Of course, with the recent ouster of George Santos, the majority in the House is extremely slim, meaning that assuming all Democrats are going to vote against this inquiry, Republicans can only afford to lose a handful of votes. It's going to be a close one next week, Kevin.
So the strategy at the White House, I just got off the phone with a source of the White House, is they're not touching this with a 10-foot pole. That's what they're saying publicly. Privately, they've set up a war room. Separately from that, Trump world, they absolutely love this. But walk us through the process of how this is going to play out next week in committee and on the floor.
Yeah, so essentially what we're going to see is this resolution to authorize the Biden impeachment inquiry brought to the House floor for an up and down vote. It's for an up and down vote, so we're going to see lawmakers cast their ballot here. This is sort of a bit of a long time coming, Kevin, because we'll remember back in the beginning of September, then Speaker McCarthy on his own accord opened this impeachment inquiry, directing 3 powerful committee chairmen to begin, bolstering their investigation, which I will note, these committees have been investigating the Biden family and the business dealings for months. But in September, the process really kicked off. And, it raised some eyebrows that Speaker McCarthy did this without holding a formal vote. He consistently said that he was working off of the Pelosi precedent, noting that back in 2019, Nancy Pelosi announced the inquiry. And then a little over a month later, they actually voted to authorize the inquiry. There was no expectation that we would actually see a vote this time around, but now with Speaker Johnson in place and essentially the White House, raising issue with the fact that this was not a formally created impeachment inquiry, Republicans having concerns about being able to enforce their subpoenas. They're going to bring this vote to the floor next week. We'll see if it passes, but regardless, a very significant moment on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue.
2024. Republicans in the House, they go through with this impeachment. Do they keep the majority in the House?
Well, look, I mean, the point about these elections is to say this is the reason why I want to hold the majority come 2024. And I'll tell you what, Kevin, House Republicans have a few things they have some things to wave around as accomplishments, but not too much enacted policy. We have seen a number of party line votes in the House, conservative bills be tossed over to the Senate where they haven't moved, which is not great for their arguments. But I mean, we will definitely be seeing them touting that on the campaign trail. We also, of course, saw that protracted speaker race back in January, and then the House Republicans having to take 3 weeks to again elect a new speaker.
I know, it took forever. I hate to cut you off, but you got to go cover the Hill. You got to go. You got to get back to work. So yes or no, one word answer, or not yes or no, one name answer. Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis? Who did better last night? You watched it.
Look, I think Nikki Haley did pretty well last night.
We're going to leave it there. I asked for one word, Michael. I asked for one word. All right, don't get me in trouble. I know you got to go back to work on the Hill. Thank you to Michael Schnell, our all-star reporter on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
The vote is in, and Representative Jamal Bowman has officially been censored after pulling a fire alarm in a House office building in September. Get this, the New York Democrat falsely pulled a fire alarm, triggering an evacuation. He was charged with a misdemeanor on October 25th over the incident, and he pleaded guilty the next day. Republicans, they've been accusing Bowman of intentionally pulling the fire alarm in an attempt to delay the vote on a government funding bill. Bowman has maintained he was just trying to open the door and that he pulled it by accident, thinking that the door was an exit, but it was actually a fire alarm. Kevin McCarthy is throwing in the towel. The California Republican who lost his job as Speaker in October said that he's not running for re-election. He wrote in a Wall Street Journal op-ed that he was leaving to, quote, serve America in new ways. I know my work is only getting started, he wrote. And McCarthy isn't the only member of Congress making an exit. More than 36 incumbents have announced that they will not seek re-election next year, including Senators Mitt Romney, done. House Financial Services Committee Chairman Patrick McHenry, done. Joe Manchin, done. Ben Cardin, done. A lot of new faces likely going to be coming to Congress. And big bank CEOs are warning about a potential economic slowdown next year. This, as there's some of the top executives from the big banks testifying before the U.S. Senate earlier this week. Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser said that the rising global conflict has only added to global economic uncertainty.
Although we certainly don't see a drastic downturn on the horizon, history suggests that a recession is possible given the macroeconomic factors at play. And they include persistent inflation in services, rising debt, and a slowdown in global growth, as well as 2 major conflicts in Europe and the Middle East.
Wall Street analysts have been somewhat optimistic about next year's forecast, hoping that Fed Chairman Jay Powell will start to lower interest rates in the first half of next year. Senate Republicans sunk Democrats' $111 billion funding bill that would have provided aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, as well as border security. Hours ahead of yesterday's failed vote, President Biden pleaded with Congress to greenlight billions of dollars to go overseas, but ultimately they blocked it in a 51-49 vote. President Biden is wiping out $4.8 billion of student loan debt for more than 80,000 Americans. The White House says that 46,000 borrowers qualify for more than $2 billion in aid if they're in income-driven repayment plans. The rest will go to those who are already at work in public service for at least a decade. Biden has found a way to get around the Supreme Court's ruling against his wide-sweeping student debt forgiveness plan, and Biden's position is definitely something that he is going to be campaigning on in 2024. Billionaire Elon Musk is growing richer by the day. Musk's company, SpaceX, is looking to sell shares that value the company at $175 billion. The potential valuation is $25 billion more than the company's worth this summer. SpaceX is angling a share sale priced at $95, totaling $500 to $750 million. This could position SpaceX to be among the world's most valuable companies, surpassing businesses like Comcast and Disney. SpaceX is on track to reach about $9 billion in revenue this year alone, attracting potential investors to go all in with the hopes of cashing in big in the years to come. Americans are heading back to the office whether they like it or not. 1 in 4 Americans work from home, with 33% of Americans working fully in the office. The rest, some type of hybrid model. That's according to new data out from Morning Consult. Apparently, the problem isn't her. Taylor Swift has been named the Time Person of the Year. It caps off a massive year for Taylor Swift, and every year they've chosen a person, a group, or concept to receive the achievement that has a strong influence on the world, good or bad. While Swift also is making history as being the first woman to appear twice on a Person of the Year cover since the franchise began in 1927. Time cited Swift's successful Eras tour and her chart-topping albums as reasons for receiving the distinction. Other candidates who were up for the title this year included Hollywood strikers, Chinese dictator, if you ask President Biden, Xi Jinping, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, Trump prosecutors, Barbie, is that a person? Russia President Vladimir Putin, King Charles III, and Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Kevin Cirilli. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come on back right here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.